You're listening to Cosmos FM on the air at 91.5 and streaming live on www.cosmosfm.org. We'd like to remind you that the opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the Cosmos FM staff, producers, volunteers, or the GAEPI's Board of Directors.
And now, Matters of Conscience, hosted by the Very Reverend Eugene Pappas, educator, ecumenist, and activist in international social issues. Matters of Conscience is intended to cause our listening audience to consider and resolve issues of personal and collective faith and ethics facing the people and the nation.
Matters of Conscience is brought to you by James and Stella Pandelidis and family.
Hello, New York. Hello, world. This is Father Eugene Pappas with one of your favorite programs at Cosmos FM on WNYE 91.5 FM. We are broadcasting our 22nd year live, prompting and promoting civil dialogue with listener participation. Our studios in the heart of New York City beam a radius of 100 miles from the top of Times Square Tower. We are, as we say each week, the umbilicus of world broadcasting. Well, that first piece you heard is rather unique to our programming today because we're going to be talking about making it through a pandemic-related divorce. Making it through a pandemic-related divorce. Now, some of you are happily married. Some of you may not be married. Some of you are contemplating marriage. Some of you may be contemplating other things. However, the pandemic, COVID-19, has caused us to rethink many things. I'm very pleased today to have a guest with me, which I'll introduce in just a moment. But we've all heard the comparisons made between the current pandemic, COVID-19, and the tragedy of 9/11/2001, and then, of course, the economic tragedy, the crash of September 2008. Particularly in the midst of these, societal crises have exerted strong grips on every move, every decision, every conversation, every activity we have as they have explicated themselves in COVID-19. They have catapulted us into waves of individual and collective anxiety and grief, neuroses, all sorts of psychological problems. And this has created a stranglehold on our psyche, both individual and maybe collectively in marriage. And certainly divorce can be one of the most difficult times of someone's life, especially being stuck in a quarantine during this pandemic of COVID-19. Between custody battles, splitting of finances and assets, meetings with attorneys and mediators, the lack of support, the feelings of isolation, in particular isolation, loneliness, depression, sadness. Divorce can be painful and extremely emotionally draining for every one of us. Today, I have a magnificent speaker with us, a woman with whom I have discussed many times this issue. And so I'd like to introduce to our listening audience Mona Zisimopoulos, who is an attorney at law, practicing now for 33 years in Bayside, Queens, a graduate of Barnard College and Brooklyn Law School. Mona, we welcome you to Cosmos FM. I believe this is your maiden voyage on our station, correct?
It is. Thank you, Father Eugene.
It's a pleasure to have you with us, and I know that you've been doing a lot of work in this area with the pandemic. Is it true that the COVID pandemic has resulted in a spike in the number of divorces facing the community today?
Well, it depends on who you ask, because, I'm sure we've all seen reports or articles discussing the skyrocketing number of divorce filings in the U.S. and around the world since the start of the pandemic. But at the same time, there was a recent study released, I think, at a Bowling Green State University looking at the effects of COVID on the divorce and marriage statistics. And that study found that plummeting rates of divorce. So I guess it depends on who you ask. I can tell you that I've been extremely busy.
Well, I had read some facts here that I have in front of me that divorce rates have spiked in the U.S. during the coronavirus pandemic as couples are stuck at home for months on end, working at home, living at home, socializing at home, in this closed intimacy. The number of people looking for divorces was 34% higher than the year before. And this is new data, and this is collected through Legal Templates. You know that company? I hope
yes.
so.
Okay, so
Legal Templates. Yes. Yes, go ahead, Mona.
Would track. They look at what people are looking for on, inquiries online. So clearly, a lot of people are locked up at home Googling, how to divorce, how to get a divorce. So that may be an accurate reflection of what people are really thinking and doing.
Yeah, this combination of stress, unemployment, financial strain, the death of loved ones in the family because of the illness of COVID, homeschooling children. I mean, this is impossible. In my mind, I don't have children, but the idea of having children homeschooled and meanwhile you're on your computer trying to do your work for your company, the mental illness, the mental strain has put a significant strain on these relationships and marriage that was not there before the pandemic. So the data has shown that 34% of couples admitted that the lockdown has caused irreparable damage to their marriage relationship. Let me ask you, is the pandemic really affecting relationships?
Definitely. And you listed a number of the major factors that are adding to this. The pandemic has been what we call the perfect storm for troubled relationships. Lockdowns and social distancing is forcing couples to spend, increasing time, amount of time together. They are not having the normal outlets that of life, weddings, vacations, going out, etc. They're stuck at home with each other. Oftentimes, they've got homeschooled children. It's very, very stressful for couples, and this can create new problems, but it can also act as a catalyst for breakups that may have already been in the cards. Let's say, a relationship was troubled, the parties were sort of trying to work it out, and now they're stuck home together under stressful circumstances, and it's sort of, the icebreaker, so to speak.
This is fanning the embers, as we say.
Correct.
This is This is stimulating what might have been there before the pandemic, and now it's become full fruition, and it's a sorrowful thing. There is much interest in separation during the quarantine that all of us have gone through. With the vast majority of states in lockdown, it's caused an uptick, if you will, in the divorce rate, and the uptick could coincide with health and human service professionals who refer to the disillusionment phase of this time when optimism turns to discouragement. A lot of people they're down. They're just down. There's nothing to excite them. There's nothing on the calendar to say, okay, we're looking forward to a vacation. We're looking forward to a special event. We're looking forward to a promotion or whatever. It's just a daily grind that goes nowhere but sunrise to sunset. So this is a major issue facing the nation and facing our people. I'd like to go to another piece of music, and this I'm going to dedicate this one to you, okay, Mona?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, this is called The Arrival of the Queen of Sheba.
Oh, I love it.
From the Oratorio of Solomon, this is George Friedrich Handel, The Arrival of the Queen of Sheba. You will be, Mona, our Queen of Sheba today on this subject, okay? Let's go right to it.
I'm honored.
This is Father Eugene Pappas with Matters of Conscience. We're back again with Mona Zisimopoulos, who is an attorney at law in Bayside, Queens, who's discussing the question of pandemic-related divorce. We must admit that 20% of couples who sought divorce who were married within the past 5 months or less have doubled the rate of recently married couples who are seeking divorce. In other words, they didn't give it a chance. The virus has stimulated separations and divorce. Now, let me ask you, Mona, are there particular issues that you are confronting in your practice since the start of the pandemic? What's happening? Domestic violence, mental health issues? What's happening?
Yes, well, I would say that the pandemic has amplified toxicity in marriages and led to increasing reports of domestic violence, particularly at the beginning of the lockdown. I think it was just like a brewing, pot that exploded. And mental health issues are really affecting relationships. As you alluded to at the beginning of the program, everyone seems to be feeling anxious or depressed. If someone comes to the table with, mental health, mental illness to begin with, the pandemic has just exacerbated it, and this has caused a lot of friction and problems within relationships. So we're seeing that extra element.
Is that because people cannot handle the pandemic and the quarantining, the lockdowns, and therefore they cannot live according to the new standard or rhythm of life within the household?
Sure. Well, the pandemic has taken away a lot of well-established routines that afforded us comfort, stability, rhythm to our lives. So, if people, if some people are reaching out and trying to find ways to cope, but people who may not have had, sound mental health to begin with or didn't have good coping mechanisms find themselves somewhat, completely unhinged by this. And this is very troublesome.
I did come across a statement and a fact that blew me out of the water. It said that in the United States, along the Bible Belt, that's the highest number of divorce rate increase during COVID-19, the Bible Belt. And one would have thought that these people are homebound, these people are, family-oriented, these people are more conservative in nature with religion and marriage and what have you, that they would be able to handle this better. The family that stays together, prays together, and prays together, stays together, whatever. But the Bible Belt had the highest recorded number of divorce rate increase during COVID-19, and that is very strange to me. Wow, I couldn't fathom that.
That is a very interesting statistic. I'm not familiar with it, and I'm curious to research and find out why. Perhaps, again, because maybe many of their established sources of support in the community disappeared. I'm thinking that might be problematic.
Yeah, their outreach, maybe the church. They couldn't go to church. They couldn't go to the social center. They couldn't go to the music fest or whatever. I don't know. But it's interesting. And they cited two states in particular, Arkansas and Alabama, double A's. So
well,
we'll look into that.
That could also be attributable to the financial issues because one of the big, money is always a common cause, has always been a common cause of marital strife. And the financial impact of COVID is definitely playing a major role in marital relations. People are finding themselves unemployed. They're furloughed. They're taking home less income. And one would think that perhaps that has been more of an impact in the Bible Belt. Perhaps those areas are more affected, so economic issues are... Yeah,
you answered a question that I was going to ask about what are the main reasons for people divorcing. But before we get to that question, one of the main reasons, I'd like to ask you about divorce cases. How are they being handled differently during the court closures? There are court closures now, so are there virtual court appearances?
Yes. Well,
really? I didn't know that.
Oh, everything is virtual now. Well, I know. I should say, at least from the matrimonial and family, most of the court, at least in New York City is definitely all virtual, and parts of downstate remain virtual. I believe that the courts are now starting to do in-person appearances in other matters, in criminal matters, but it's definitely slowed down the process and dragged it out. Divorce has always been a time-consuming and expensive process. As I say, but I want to qualify that. Contested divorces. If people come to an agreement, they can do that as quickly as they like. But if you need court intervention, it's always been a time-consuming process. With the court closures, that created an additional backlog, and now the shift to virtual appearances has changed the way they're handled, because parties and their attorneys aren't actually able to appear before a judge in court. That can be very helpful sometimes when a client hears what the judge thinks about the case. The parties don't get together with their attorneys in person. Sometimes that could really be helpful in getting to the crux of an issue, or sitting and talking before, the two attorneys and the two clients. With everything being virtual, things are taking a lot longer.
Of course, and I would take it heightens the expression of anxiety, because we need that social content, we need that social communication and contact with the person in front of us across the table. Oftentimes, what we say over the phone may not be said face to face. So I don't know if the virtual court appearance is the best way to do this. It may expedite the issue, but I don't think it's the best way to do this. What are some of the main reasons why people do go into divorce? You mentioned finances, and I'm sure that's a major issue. The loss of a job, the unemployment, no proposals for a new position, all of this plus. What are the pluses?
Well, finances have a couple of components. One, when there are economic downturns, history has shown that economic downturns have tended to result in an increase in the number of divorces. But other financial issues that are difficult is differences in how couples think about spending and saving money. That can be difficult to navigate in a marriage, and it's surprising how many couples don't really communicate about it. If one person's a spender, okay, and the other person is a saver, that's sort of hard to reconcile. Or, how many parties don't actually discuss finances? One party handles all the finances, and one party, either by intent or by, doesn't really care about it and is in the dark about finances.
By submission says, okay, you handle it.
Yeah,
that's it.
It can create a power imbalance. And another issue that's really come to light in more recent years is that the rise of women who are successful and out earning their spouses. This can create a problem in some couples. Not everyone, some men are threatened by having their wives earn more money. Also, this financial independence affords women the ability to say, I don't want to be in this marriage. In the past, perhaps a woman might be stuck and say, well, where am I going to go? I can't afford to get a divorce. As women become more financially independent, they are more likely to seek to dissolve a relationship that isn't working. So
well, as you mentioned, the male ego is involved here, especially with when two people earning a salary. And the male ego is threatened, as you said, or challenged or embarrassed with a woman, a wife who's bringing in more money and maybe sustaining him.
Some men have a hard time dealing with this, yeah.
Not me. I love to be kept.
I prefaced it by saying some men, Father.
I know some. I'm the exception to that rule. Anyone who wants to keep me is fine. I love rich widows. Rich widows, where are you? Line up. There you go. There you go. What common misconceptions are there about divorce? I mean, I want you to talk about them, that only women get spousal support, mothers control the custody of the children, the fault misconduct affects the financial award and the custody of the children. Let's take each one of these individually. What are the misconceptions about divorce, about women getting spousal support only?
Okay. Well, there are a lot of misconceptions, which is why when people start having problems or are considering divorce, they should really consult with an attorney and get sound legal advice and not just listen to what their friends tell them or what they see online. So speaking about women and spousal support, well, as I just mentioned, the tables have turned somewhat. It's no longer that only the men are the primary breadwinners. So if you have a case where the wife out-earns the husband or the husband isn't really working, maybe she's the primary breadwinner and he's either chosen to stay home and take care of the kids, or he's working on some kind of an independent project that isn't as lucrative, he could be entitled to spousal support. And it comes as a shock when you have the primary breadwinner is the wife, for example, and I have to tell her, well, you might be required to pay spousal support to your husband. It comes as quite a shock. They're not ready to address that or happy to hear that. Yeah.
And the control of the custody of the children?
Back in, things are changing a lot, but many mothers still feel that somehow the children are, there's a presumption that mother has custody of the children.
But isn't that a court presumption? Many courts and many judges assume the mother should have the control of the children.
Not necessarily, Father.
Okay.
The pendulum has really swung to encouraging both parents to be involved with the children. Okay, there's no presumption that one parent has a primary right. Yeah, or in many families, the mother does spend a lot of the caretaking for the children and a lot of dynamics. But that, again, has changed. More women are working. Both couples are at work. The kids have activities. So there isn't necessarily this idea that women will come and say, I'll let him have the kids on this weekend, or I will let him see the children. Judges hate hearing, I will let him. In other words, the father, has rights, and the children benefit by having a good relationship with both parents and spending time with both parents.
Of course.
So it's hard for a lot of mothers who come in thinking, especially with very young children, it's very difficult to handle cases with mothers of very young children because they'll say, oh, well, he doesn't know how to take care of the baby. He's never taken care of the baby. And the judge's position is, well, that's the way he's going to learn. He has to learn. And it can be very difficult for especially first-time moms or moms of infants when you have to tell them, well, he's entitled to pick up the child. He's entitled to weekends with the child. And but that's just the way it is.
Well, we're speaking with Mona Zisimopoulos, who is an attorney at law in Bayside, Queens, and we're discussing this whole question of divorce and the many ramifications of divorce during this pandemic-19 issue. Let's go to another piece of music to calm our feathers. But I want you to think about this question, if you will. Mona, what advice would you give to anyone considering divorce? Now, whether it be a newly married couple, a long-term marriage couple, or even a contemplating couple who's thinking about getting married, and in the background is the hint of divorce. What if? So that's the next question we're coming to after we hear Johann Pachelbel, Canon in D major. Canon in D major. We're back again. This is Father Eugene Pappas with our dear Mona, who's giving us the insights to divorce during the pandemic crisis. And we have what we call in the media, a Johnny come lately, Father John Lardas, the pastor of the Archangel's Church in Port Washington, Long Island, is with us, but not from Long Island, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Steel Town, the steel mills of Pittsburgh. Father John, are you there?
Good morning, Father Eugene. Good morning, Ms. Mona Zisimopoulos. And it's a wonderful to be part of such an auspicious crowd and program.
Well, thank you so much. And you should know, Mona, that Father John's been on the air with me many times and is a longtime friend and colleague and certainly a devotee of Cosmos FM. So let's get into that question. What advice would you give to anyone considering divorce right now? A newly married couple, a long-term married couple, or even a couple that's contemplating marriage and saying, well, what about divorce?
Well, I'm a big advocate of therapy, both for people, confronting any types of issues. And divorce is a major life transition. And the reason I recommend therapy is not because people have mental health issues, but it's to help them prepare for the difficulties that come with the dissolution of a relationship, their insecurities, their fears, their anxieties. And I think it's very helpful for people to deal with those issues in the appropriate forum, and that will then help them make the right legal decisions and address the divorce better. Do you understand what I mean about that, Father Eugene? Yeah,
of course.
That it's difficult for people to make the right decisions for themselves when they're so caught up with anger, hurt. So I find that clients who do deal with those issues are better able to make decisions for themselves and make better clients for me. Secondly, I think that it's important to speak to different attorneys before you select an attorney to hear different ways of proceeding and feel comfortable with the attorney's approach and philosophy. I don't feel that the most aggressive attorney is always the best attorney, because I do recommend that parties try to avoid conflict, particularly where there are children involved. You know, some people look at divorce as a battle and one has to win, but they don't take into consideration that the battle comes with a psychic toll and a very high cost. So fighting costs you a lot of money, both financially and from a mental health perspective.
Mona, you mentioned anger and hurt as an impetus to divorce. One word that was left out possibly is revenge. Sometimes revenge is the stimulus to divorce. People want to get back at somebody, whether it's their spouse or the family or whatever. But I like the fact that you're suggesting possibly even, as we do in the medical field, go for a second or third opinion, a legal opinion. Don't just jump at divorce. Speak to a therapist, speak to a lawyer, speak to another lawyer, see if there's another way out of this besides divorce. Let me ask Father John. Father John, as a pastor of certainly well over a quarter of a century, how do you approach the question of divorce when people come to you? And do they come to you when it's a fait accompli, when it's already done? They've gotten their civil divorce and now they're simply coming to get a church divorce.
Yeah, oftentimes this is a very good question. And that's what Mona had asked me about that a few weeks ago. What is the church doing about divorces? And, unfortunately for a majority of these things are already, complete facto, that they're coming to us already with the civil divorce in hand. The divorce is taking place, and that they're just looking for the ecclesiastical resolution to the spiritual issues. There are a few times when we have had the blessing where there's been challenges in relationships, and it comes up through counseling or through confession. And I want to accent the point that Mona said, that even as priests, it's important for us to have in our hands therapists or counselors that we do trust, that we do have a sense that they're kind of on the same page as we are from a Greek Orthodox tradition, and to be able to point these people in those directions. And oftentimes, I have gladly seen the happy results where people have been able to, through these counselors who look at things from a more objective point of view and help give the tools for resolving conflict in a positive and uplifting way, have been able to return to a happy relationship and a happy marriage.
Well said. I have experienced the same scenario that you have. I think most of us as pastors, I think people maybe hesitate going to the local pastor, their priest, for a resolution on a pending divorce issue because they're embarrassed to bring this up to the priest. But they will go to their lawyer, or they will go to a therapist, or sometimes they don't go to either one. They just go straight to the lawyer for a divorce decree, and that's where it ends up. I'd like to go to another piece of music now as we're continuing this discussion, and this one I'm going to dedicate this to Presbytera Eleni, Father John. Yes, I'm giving it to Presbytera Eleni, and this is Claude Debussy. Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune, which means the clarity of the moon, not the clarity of the lunatic. Clair de Lune. This is for Presbytera Eleni. My dear Mona, let's ask another question. What measures do you give to couples how to avoid divorce? What measures are given?
Well, I wish I could give measures, but I'd love to have this opportunity to tell your listeners some things I recommend that I think people need to have realistic expectations about relationships. Unfortunately, I think that people don't really understand how challenging any types of relationships are, not only with your spouse, but with work, with your family members, with your siblings. It takes a lot of compromise and understanding, and so much more so with someone with whom you're living on a daily basis. So people get married, people from different family backgrounds, different life experiences. Now they're living together, forced to make decisions together, and it's understandable that there's going to be some conflict, some disagreement. And I just feel that a lot of people, particularly younger couples, aren't prepared to deal with it, don't know how to deal with it, and just assume that, the relationship isn't working out rather than understanding this is just how relationships go. So I think that people need to be more realistic about what's involved in making a relationship work.
Father John, let me ask Father John, in your premarital counseling, I'm sure you raised the question that when a young couple is coming in to get married, that they're not just marrying each other, they're marrying each other's family as well. There's a whole a clan that's getting involved in the marriage. There are family traditions. There's linguistic issues of who speaks the same language in the family, especially with intermarriage, if you will, between Greek Orthodox and non-Greek Orthodox, or non-Greeks, if you will. Interracial marriages, all elements that bring a greater mixture to the marriage, but maybe bring a greater area for conflict or misunderstanding. How do you approach that as a pastor?
So I think a couple of things that the leadership has come from Archdiocese to some extent. The one nice thing has been the wedding seminars that have been created over the past few years that have been developed by our pastoral care department from the Hellenic College and Holy Cross School of Theology, and that's a pre-can seminar that usually lasts a day from about 9 to 3 that we ask all the couples to participate in. And I'd say like 85 to 90% of the couples that go through it felt that they got something beneficial from that. And the scope of that seminar is the theme is Journey to Oneness. And in it, is the communicating on the same page, understanding each other's beliefs, understanding each other's genealogies and how they were raised and so forth and so on.
But I think I agree with you. But I also say that after that general pre-Cana conference in which kids come together and they're being given a lecture and a discussion period in a major group of assembly of couples, they need individual talks. They need to come back to their local pastor and have individual talks. And like I always say to them, if there are questions that you have not asked, don't get married. ask the questions now. Do not go to bed on your honeymoon with a stranger. Know who you're marrying. This is very important to me. Mona, I don't know if you agree with me on that psychology.
Oh, Father, I totally agree with you, because one of the things that I've noticed is that oftentimes the issue that will lead to a divorce existed before the marriage. So somebody will come in here and will be crying or very distraught. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And then when I start getting the marital history, I'm like, well, wait a minute. But this was there. You just perhaps chose not to notice it because...
No, they chose not to ask the question. Even child rearing, are we going to have children? They don't ask that question. And after marriage, you hear that one of the partners says, well, I never intended to have a family or have children.
Yeah.
Well, what are you talking about?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. Even with the premarital counseling, I think I've read a couple of studies that find that it's difficult to get through to people, let's say, in the throes of love. You know, they're planning this wedding, and they're sort of hearing with one ear kind of about this. This isn't us. This doesn't apply to us. And it's very difficult to impress upon people who are so caught up in the whole pre-wedding let's say, frenzy, to really think about these difficulties or the hard work involved in a relationship. And one of the other issues I wanted to bring up, if I may, is that social media is really affecting relationships. Where people are spending increasing amounts of time, especially during the pandemic, glued to their screens, looking at these fake realities. You know, parties, everybody puts these pictures. It looks like every couple's in love. Every couple is so happy. What's wrong with me? And not realizing that all of those photos, and many of those photos and posts, aren't an accurate reflection of what's really going on in that relationship. So if people pay too much attention to this kind of fake existence, it makes them feel, well, what's wrong with my relationship? You know, my marriage is a little drudgery. You know, that's the way relationships are. So I think that social media is also contributing to this sense of disillusionment and unhappiness in relationships.
Well, I'm going to ask Father John, when I was first ordained, as I often say, in the last century, because I was ordained way back when, I remember growing up when in the Greek community in particular, you didn't even discuss divorce at the table. It was a word that was whispered that someone is getting a divorce, a separation, or the marriage is being dissolved. It was a shameful thing. It was a grievous thing. And today it's just a matter of fact. Just a matter of fact. I'm changing my hairstyle. I'm getting a divorce. Father John.
Yeah, you know, so a couple of things with that, and I wanted to go back to what Mona was also saying about the sense of kind of living in a fantasy land a little bit. We're getting ready for spiritual talks, and St. Basil the Great has this thing called "Give heed to thyself," in the sense of, you know, knowing reality, knowing really, living in reality, really who you are. And I think one of the things that I do with the couples, Father, going back to after those seminars, is meeting with them personally. And as we go through the wedding service, you know, part of divorce is also an expression of the spiritual crisis that exists in our church. If we're getting married because of love, we're getting married because of God. But how many people are living an authentic life in Christ? How many people are really making Christ at the center of the relationship? Because that's making love at the center of a relationship. And so when we go through the wedding service and we show how this wedding service is so, in its pomp and circumstances, the deep theological symbolisms that are there that are kind of embossing on the couple, this is the roadmap to follow. This is the architectural plan for your marriage. And at the height of that is Christ on the cross, and from the cross is love. And when people can understand who Christ is, then their relationships have the opportunity to, like the wedding of Cana of Galilee, the wine that Jesus changed, the water that he changed into wine was the best they ever tasted. And so people then have the chance to taste the best of what a relationship is when Christ is there. And that's a big challenge. That's a big
Father
challenge.
John, what you're saying essentially with Christ and the cross and the church, we often speak of Christ as the nymphios της Εκκλησίας. Christ is the bridegroom of the church, and the church is his bride, meaning you and I and Mona and everybody else. And that just as he sacrificed totally upon the cross for the church, for its survival, not only to survive but to thrive, so is it in marriage. Each partner must sacrifice. Now, I don't use the word, Mona, I don't use the word compromise when people are coming to me with these problems. I said, no, the compromise means one of you is giving up so that the other may have something more. I said that creates an envy. How about accommodating your partner? That's a better word.
That's a
accommodation.
Better word, yes.
That's my word, accommodation. I should have been a lawyer. You know, I studied for law. I should have been a lawyer. But anyway.
It's not too late. It's not too late.
It's not too late, hopefully. I'm going to go to another piece of music because we're coming down to the wire with this program. It's been so lively today. Let's go to a little bit of Johann Sebastian Bach. This is Suite number 3. Suite number 3. I'm dedicating this to your daughter, Mona. What is her name?
Isabel.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Isabel, which is Spanish for Elizabeth. Go ahead. Well, we're back to the last almost 5 minutes of our program, and I really want to get into the question of a word that did not exist in the last century. That was prenuptial agreements. What about prenuptials since the 20th century has passed and we're in the 21st century? Mona, prenuptials.
Well, they are definitely becoming a lot more popular and have shed the stigma they might have had in the past.
Well, there was a stigma. There was a stigma. People whispered about divorcees.
Yeah. So in the past, I think even when I first started practicing, if you were asked to sign a prenup, it would sort of, you'd get offended at it. And now it's become a lot more commonplace. And I think one of the main reasons for that is the delay in marriage. People are getting married a little later in life. They're dating longer before heading to the altar.
And they're more established.
Correct. And by the time they marry, they've had time to accumulate assets that they want to protect. Parties have family money or business interests they might have acquired from their parents. They might have children from a prior relationship or been married before. And, I think people are more cognizant of the reality that many marriages do end in divorce. Marriage is a legal status, and they'll, want to protect what's theirs in the event that marriage doesn't work out.
Well, the prenuptial agreement is nothing new, really. I mean, it was there with the royals. It's been there with the nobles of history. It's been there with the entrepreneurial giants, in the past of big families making arrangements for the marriage. But in the local community, when young people were marrying at 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 in the past century, they had no real assets. Hence, we had a dowry. We had a dowry in weddings, if you remember then.
Yes.
What we call in Greek the prika. What are you giving me to marry your daughter? Yanni, did you get a prika to marry Eleni?
No, in the Icarian tradition, the Icarians, the groom.
Tell me the groom got the prika. Yes, I know that. But what about the bride?
Oh, I got a beautiful prika with President.
Oh, my Lord. Well, we're down almost to the last few moments of this program, and there's so much more we need to discuss. Mona, I'm going to have you promise me that you'll come back again to discuss more about these legal issues, maybe not so much divorce, but other issues facing the family.
I would love to. This has been a lot of fun, Father.
And Father John, I'm so glad you could join us, even though you came in a little late. I'm sure you were doing something spiritually uplifting for the first half hour.
I was doing a read-along for a school in Syosset on the Giving Tree.
On the Giving Tree?
Oh, yeah. What a great book.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Father John, you always amaze me by your depth of spirituality. I wish I was like you.
I'd like to share with you one story real quick.
My best regards to Eleni and Mona, my best regards to Isabel. I'm going to play another piece here as we're going off the air, but stay on for a moment so we say goodbye. Father John, would you like to say goodbye to the listening audience?
It's wonderful to be part of this great program once again. And we are thankful for all our listeners who show great support and interest in the issues that we are confronted with on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. And Mona, Zisimopoulos.
Thank you, Father Eugene, for having me as a guest on your program today. Father John, it was nice to have you join us and to catch up a little bit. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
And this is a piece I'm going to dedicate to our listening audience. This is the Symphonie de Fanfare by Jean-Joseph Mauret. That was a piece of masterpiece theater. I'm sure it's familiar to all of you. But not being married, but married to the church, I'm looking, Mona, help me out, for a post-ordination nuptial with my bishop. I want to know what I deserve. What am I getting out of it?
I think we should address that in a private conversation.
I think so. Goodbye, New York. Goodbye, world.